Well, hello, hello, and happy Friday to you. As you know, we're on the eve. Actually, no, tomorrow is equinox, whether you're in the southern or the northern hemisphere. It's equinox time. We've got this very strong Chiron energy coming up, inviting us to do our inner work and heal our wounded parts, and it's a full moon, so lots of watery emotions coming up with my clients today, and maybe you can relate to this thing about feeling depressed and whether it's toxic or healthy shame. So I wanted to just jump in here before my family get home and share something with you that often gets very confused or misunderstood. And before I do, I first want to tell you that chronic shame is not your fault. This is something that was assigned or given to you pre-7-year-old, part of adverse childhood experiences when you didn't know that everything you thought and felt didn't belong to you. And I think chronic shame for me is probably one of the most corrosive emotions that people experience at any age. It's like a cancer. And if you've ever been through this, maybe not once, maybe many times, first there's always this tumor. Perhaps it comes very quietly, initially from maybe a severe scolding by a parent or teacher, and along with the breaking of the connection, there's always this sense of I can't trust that I'm enough underneath it. So this is really part of my dialogue where I teach kind people that are empathetic and sensitive and animals to heal from trauma of all types. Because although you can't transform what's happened to you, you can't change what's happened to you. You can transform it. It's kind of like turning shit into fertilizer. Excuse me for swearing, but I'm hoping you're getting the gist already. And thank you for joining me here. I don't know why I can't see the comments today, but shame festers. It's like an open wound that goes septic. It metastasizes and it spreads, affecting your entire being and body. Your whole body collapses, and it kind of feels like that. I know if I ever feel into those times when I was shamed or made wrong for something that I never did, it feels like your whole being just collapses. Your heart breaks into a million tiny pieces. And if you're pre-7-year-old, it's all about you. So you cannot discern that this is somebody else projecting their hurt and their wounds on you. You take it personally. And we know, even though, we're told don't take things personally, we do. And there's always the spirit in our bodies, starts to disassociate because it's undermining our basic sense of well-being and worthiness in the world. It's just like we don't know where to fit. And shame is always associated with, in my insight of working with bodies and people for almost 20 years, that it comes with a very specific body posture. I mean, if you've ever had a dog that you've caught doing something wrong, you see shame in their own faces. So this isn't just people, but it sort of carries. And in a herd of horses, there has to be safe boundaries there. And the horse that needs to learn how to survive in a herd is often cast out and kept out, which is a terrible thing for a prey animal. But I digress. So I hope you're getting what I'm saying here. Hi, Sue. Yeah, lots of shit coming up for you to turn into fertilizer. I think this is just the time. The time is so right, and we're all doing our work. And if you didn't catch my Facebook Live, I think I did yesterday, I talked about how to heal this collective trauma, the collective shadow in the deep waters, instead of just sort of skimming the surface. And it's not that we haven't all done good work. We've all done a lot of personal inner work. And now we have to, now we have the tools and we have what we need, including community. We can go into the deep water and start to contribute toward healing this collective trauma that's sort of in the miasms or in the quantum field of human consciousness. So it does look, because it is that posturing of the body, you know, it's the head down, it's the curling inward, that's very much an autonomic pattern of being shamed and really feeling shame in our body. I see this in trauma all the time because it includes hyper-arousal and hypo-arousal and also shutdown. So the opposite body experience of shame is, as we all know, a sense of self-pride and triumph, that we're resilient and that we can overcome obstacles. And it is physiologically quite impossible at times to experience shame. Okay, it's impossible to experience shame when we're really strongly rooted and embodied in our sense of pride and our inner sense of dignity, our integrity with ourselves. And this is this link that I wanted to talk about today between depression and shame, because shame, or what's called toxic shame, is, as I said, experienced during many periods of our lives. And sometimes it's valid because we have, you know, we've done something wrong, and that's healthy shame. But usually first when we're an infant, as I said, that pre-7-year-old, you're a baby, you're a helpless baby. We're borrowing the vagal tone of our parents. We're looking at the microfacial expressions to see how we fit into the world and where we belong. And often, if a parent isn't aware of their own trauma, they project that onto their children. And I certainly know that from growing up with a second generation alcoholic father who was very abusive, and his go-to, because we were all sensitive, was to shame us as not being good enough. I'll never forget, he used to say, "You're number one or you're nothing." You know, there was no space in between that. And it used to break my heart because it felt like no matter what I did, it was never good enough. And there was always shame attached to that. And again, I just want to say, I've become so awake. My long-held habit of taking good, Sue. Yeah, you know, I think we are awakening. And yes, there's a lot of this coming up, especially with the whole Me Too movement, where women have been shamed for being, you know, promiscuous. Whereas if a man did the same, they'd be told they were ballsy or confident. And it's up to us to start to change this. So, you know, back to this thing of toxic and toxic shame and depression, we end up carrying this trauma from their childhood into our childhood. And this is where my work with working on the cellular level, working on the epigenetics, so the what lies on top of the DNA, RNA, LNA, is a way to change this. So the good news is you can change this intergenerational and familial trauma from going into future generations, because you're doing the work and you're committed to it. So, you know, this is where when I talk about this, and I've done other, I don't know what these are, Facebook Lives or webinars on attachment styles, because our attachment style, whether we're avoidant or ambivalent or whatever you're choosing, if you're don't have a healthy attachment style because your parents didn't, you're attuning to them, that's your normal. You know, this is like saying to somebody, I'm beating you because I love you. It's abuse, you know, through and through. That is not okay. And yes, we can forgive the person, but we're not excusing the behavior here. This is not acceptable. And toxic shame is a cellular body quality of defeat. There's no getting around that. It is what it is. And what this toxic shame does, and we've all, I know you can, hopefully you can relate to this if you're listening to this on the replay or on, I'd love your comments and questions, but I'm sure that you can recall a moment where you were shamed wrongfully. And it's a horrible, horrible feeling, because it literally feels in the posturing as well, like your life force drains out of you. The blood drops to your feet. And a lot of times that dorsal ventral vagal tone, you will faint, you know, because it's such a shock to the body to basically be told that you mean nothing and that you are nothing because remember, 7-year-old, it is all about you, pre-7-year-old. And a lot of times it is our parents who do this, really smack this into us. But it can be other people too, family members, bullying siblings, bullying schoolmates. I'll never forget my PE teacher at senior school. She just had it in for me. I had two sisters that were champion. One was a champion swimmer, one was a champion diver, and I was a good champion synchronized swimmer in my own right. And I remember her forcing me onto a 3-meter diving board, and I was terrified because I didn't want to dive. It wasn't my thing. And how she shamed and ridiculed me in front of the rest of the girls when I refused to do whatever it was, an inward pike or whatever. And, it didn't really stop there. She constantly made these snide remarks at every practice. And no matter what sport I did, it just felt like she had it in for me. I didn't see her doing it to any of the other girls. And, the biggest hurt for me was I had my colors for representing my country. I was the youngest person to ever represent my country at 12. And I'm not saying this to brag, but she refused to give me my school colors. And that was just, there was so much shame in that because I didn't know what I'd done wrong. And I used to go home and say to my mother, oh my gosh, what have I done wrong? What have I done to upset this person? And it became personal because she'd shamed me over and over again. And if you've ever been in a narcissistic and codependent relationship, you know what I'm talking about, where someone tries to control you by minimizing you and shaming you all the time. And I had that with my ex-husband, who was a classic untreated PTSD. He had his own issues, but he was a very covert narcissist. And he very slowly, every day, he'd tell me, I'm too fat, I'm ugly, I'm not good enough, I'm that. And I ended up almost taking my life. He put a gun in front of me and said, go shoot yourself because you're a worthless piece of shit. And that was really the beginning of my new life, the life that I came here to live as enough, as lovable, as beautiful, as all the things that I had been sort of told that I wasn't. And I think this is, sadly, we see this as well in bullying siblings and in relationships that are supposed to be built on love. Because oftentimes too, our siblings, my sisters never did this, thank goodness, because my father was enough, but that oftentimes you'll see siblings copy what their parents are dosing out. And I remember my dad actually doing that to my older sister as well. She, the way she chewed offended him, the way she looked offended him, and he made her life a living hell. And I often think that she had weight issues later on in her life because of all this nonsense that my father had done in dosing out daily doses of abuse and toxic shame, because it is abuse. And I think that oftentimes, because a parent can't feel or see that siblings are doing the bullying and are causing humiliation to their offspring, is a bad thing and should be stopped, it just continues. And the other kids get away with it as well, which just perpetuates this horrendous, vicious, awful cycle of abuse. So if we don't heal, which really happens at that biological level these days, we will always attract shame to us. That's why you see this in abuse cases, whether it's, rape or narcissistic relationships, whatever it is, because we're vibrating at such a low frequency. And we're in that space of self-loathing and low self-esteem and self-hate and self-sabotage, and all those things that keep people really, really stuck, makes us sick as well, or depressed, which of course then leads to this internalized anger. When it's not expressed healthily, anger, it shows up as cancers, it shows up as fibromyalgia, it shows up as ME and a lot of autoimmune diseases, because what we're doing is we're actually creating antibodies to our conscious embodiment. There's no love for the bodies that we're in. And this is where this work is groundbreaking, because it stops you from attracting this unconsciously by being with people and situations and work environments and that keep us in that pattern of defeat and low self-esteem. It's the nasty boss that passes you over for promotions and is just out of integrity, and I'm sure many of you, I know a lot of my clients have suffered that sort of shame at the hands of very narcissistic bosses as well. And I know it can be very tough to break out of this, but with the right support and with the commitment and the consistency and the practices, you can heal permanently. And I really want you to hear that if you're listening to this and you can relate. Hi, Darlene. Toxic shame is what causes depression and all the pieces that go with it, because it hosts this myriad of things on the biological level of shutdown, the trapped anger, the aggression, and that in turn, it's a domino effect that creates this depressed neurophysiology in our bodies. And the physiology that comes with toxic shame is the depression on your body systems, because you can't express anger in a healthy way because you've never had that modeled to you. And you feel like speaking up is going to just bring more shame and more of this feeling that is painful in your body. And so your metabolism slows down, and you start to create a myriad of dis-ease in the body, because, what is the definition of disease? It's just not being easy in your body. And I see this time and time again, where it actually then turns on a person's predispositions, right? Those epigenetics on the genetic line for depression, for example. Or in my case, when my father wasn't taught how to express his feelings in a healthy way, especially anger, he became an alcoholic, right, to numb it down. And what it did was the complete opposite, because when he drank, he became an angry drunk, and he deflected and projected that at anyone that was there. And as children, we were easy targets. So, other people might have a genetic predisposition to, as I said, an addiction, like my father had alcoholism, or obesity, or fibromyalgia, or gut issues, or mental illness, whatever it is. If you're sitting on predisposed epigenetic markers, where it takes 12 of those markers on your DNA to switch on one of those diseases, and you're sitting on 8 and you're still suppressing and you're still feeling ashamed and you're depressed, all you need is 2 more life triggers to turn that gene on and fully express the disease. And that's really where my work with trauma, working with Parama Body Talk and Chinese medicine, and my integrative approach to this work can really help you. And, it's pretty much accepted by those who are in this sort of new field of traumatology, that our survival responses can get stuck in this sort of very chaotic turbulence, where you can't navigate your way out of this deep water, and you just move. You're either constantly on fight, flight, or freeze mode, and you're pumping cortisol, and your adrenals get burnt out because you're hyper vigilant all the time, and you can't, when you're there, process anything that's going on in your life. Including, varied experiences of how you're feeling and your sensations and your thoughts. So people numb out, and this is oftentimes when they disassociate from their bodies. So their bodies suffer the abuse, and you, the infinite being, watches your body being abused. It's a terrible thing. And I think many of these people believe that the bulk of mental illness is just a symptom or a byproduct of, poor circumstances, whether that's demographic or finances or cultural, early in life, with limited help to move that person towards more goodness, because, we need good people around us. And oftentimes, especially in impoverished societies, there is no good example to follow to show you how to move toward the light, to move toward goodness and safety and processing of these original traumas, where you can then start rewiring the neurons and the dendrites and the circuitry in your brain. And I get passionate about this work because I know how many lives it's changed. And I love the work of Bessel van der Kolk. He has a great book called The Body Keeps the Score. And Gabor Mate, I am indebted to him for the rest of my life. He's got amazing books. And, if you're new to this work and you want to start really exploring and understanding how you're ticking and work on healing some of these adverse childhood experiences, he's written a book called When the Body Says No, and there's also another one called Scattered Minds. He has tons of YouTube videos. In fact, both of them do, but Gabor writes in a way that's very simple for you to actually get. And I've talked a lot about the adverse childhood experiences before. You can go over to my website, Access Your True Nature, take the ACE test, take one step towards reclaiming your wholeness and your joy and your vitality in your life, and know that what happened to you is not your fault. It's just the bad programming of this reality that I call the insane asylum that everyone is committed to and nobody knows it. So, I've helped a lot of my private clients really start to understand not just intellectually, but what's going on in their physiology. Because remember, we have to go at the body's pace. We have to go at the body's pace because the body's what's holding onto this in the cellular memory of being shamed or being traumatized or abused. And, I want to make sure that you hear this today. As we sort of head into this beautiful energy that's really encouraging us to bring all these watery, unexpressed emotions up to the surface so that we can heal them together. And, we have to do it embodied. We can't do it from the intellect, from the mind. So please, don't forget that these trauma imprints from toxic shame, they can be healed and they can be shifted permanently. And this work is not for the faint-hearted. It's not a quick fix. It's not an overnight miracle. It can be. I have had times where it's been a very spontaneous healing and it's happened fast. But for most of us, there's layers and layers and layers and layers of shame. So, you need to get support. You cannot do this on your own. They're blind spots and you have tucked them away in places and parts of your body. You're holding these issues in your tissues because perhaps you haven't had a container that is safe where you can rest and work through this step by step at your body's pace. So yes, it does take work, and it is a full-on commitment to doing the heavy lifting that's required to shift all this old toxic imprints that may have been carried along through intergenerational or familial or cultural trauma. But it is so worth the effort. And if you're committed, which I know you are, if you're part of my tribe, to really heal the planet, not just the collective planet of remembering our humanity, but being the guardians and the stewards of the earth and the animals and the plants, so that we can contribute to a better world, a world that thrives and that's sustainable. And it starts with you. So, utilizing that sort of dynamic relationship within the context of a functional and very therapeutic alliance, shame can be transformed to a core sense of self-respect and self-compassion and a sense of self-pride, pride in yourself, to be full of yourself. Because that's a very common one I hear a lot too, is, people saying that they were ridiculed because they were too big for their boots. I certainly heard that a lot. Or, who do you think you are? You're so full of yourself. And the bullying that went on by my peers in my schooling time. So, I think we've all been through that. And when we come together like this in the We Too movement, we're not only healing ourselves, but we're healing this super wounded feminine energy that's part of all of us. And I would be honored to help you and support you in any way. So if this little video has resonated with you today, please like it, please share it, leave your comments and questions below, because I know that when you start to understand the effects of shame on addiction and other related issues, and you can start to really get curious about how you can access this from a body sense, right? Being embodied, and work through this, understanding the neurobiological development and the evolutionary underpinnings of what holds shame and trauma in place that then causes depression, then you can start to replace this with a big dose of forgiveness and self-compassion. And this is what I live for. You know, I'm on a mission to change this, because I know that until we can have that self-compassion for ourselves, that's my dog playing with a water bottle, we can't help others. We can't help others. And check out my Out of the Blues program. It's on my website as well. It's very intensive. Like I said, this is deep work, but it works on so many different levels, and there are practices and exercises and movement-based things that you can do, as well as learning about your physiology and your biology of belief. So check that out. I'll put a link below. And hi, Fiona and Sue and Darlene. Thank you for joining me on this Friday. Happy full moon blessings to you. Happy equinox, whether you're in the north or the south. Celebrate the harvest. Celebrate the seeds that you're planting if you're in springtime like I am. And if you're going into winter, celebrate what has worked and how far you've come along the way. And enjoy the harvest. Take a rest and listen to your body, because sometimes depression isn't depression either. It's a signal from your physical body to take a time out, have some deep rest, go inside yourself, get intimate into UC with your own body, and bring it back to life through love. All right, lots of love to you all. Bye. Mwah.